Awesome. Okay, so we are going back into kind of finish up the buyer section. So we stopped with 2 weeks ago. Hey, that we had sent over the cover letter with the email. And so then this is just getting into temporary lease. And if y'all hear anything that you want to stop and talk about, like, feel free to stop me at any point during this. Okay, so seller temporary lease, which I think I have a copy of it here. This form has not changed for a long time, but we still have the 2011 form on it. And so you can tell that with that top part. Temporary lease, you might have heard me say I don't love. And the reason why I don't love it is because it is difficult for a buyer to really get a good look at the house before they close, right? So if there's a temporary lease for 2 days or for 2 weeks or for 2 months, when the buyer comes through to do their final walkthrough, which I still encourage them to do, it's not like, oh, I'll just do walkthrough at the end of the lease. They should do it prior to closing. But when they come through, it's going to look the same as when they came through to look at the house for the first time. All the furniture is still going to be there, rugs are still going to be down, pictures are still going to be on the walls. And so it's just not the exact same experience as if they're coming through the house totally vacant. Sorry, y'all, I'm not sharing screen anymore. If they're not coming through the house totally vacant to see, to see the house as it sits, where that really is what they bought. And so to me, it's just one of those more gut check times for the buyer of, they're going to have to buy this house and then see it in its worst condition after that. And so it just has a little more opportunity for buyer to have some remorse about it and not feel like, hey, they're getting this like awesome house that is perfectly clean and all the holes in all the walls are filled and the yard is perfectly mowed and all that. And so it's just hard for us to control that experience when we have a temporary lease on there. So for that reason, I don't love temporary lease. I also don't love it because what happens if there is damage, in between that time, and it's hard to prove, was the damage there, was it not? We normally don't do a deposit on a temporary lease because most of the time, just in good faith, you're like, well, the seller has been in that property. They're not going to cause any damage to it. But then that also leaves the buyer at more risk after the seller moves out. So anyway, anybody have any issues with temporary leases in the past or things that you've had issues or anything you want to talk about temporary lease? Okay. I normally set this up for a date certain. So like if we're closing on the 12th of April, rather than saying 48 hours after funding, because I don't know when funding would occur. Did funding occur at 11 in the morning or 3 in the afternoon or what the situation is? I normally will say, hey, I want the lease to run through the 14th at 5 p.m. Now that does mean that if my close date changes, I may need to physically change that with an amendment, change that date in the lease back. And the other thing to know on the lease back is holdover. So on page 2 of the lease back, this one, on the back side, well, not back side, it's just page 2, right? Since we don't print anything off and see anything front and back, but it used to be on the back side of it. It says that there is this holdover, and that if for some reason the tenant doesn't move out, the tenant being the seller doesn't move out in time, that the landlord would be entitled to this holdover days. Well, that doesn't just mean that the seller can stay for that rate for however long he needs to. Really, he can be evicted, but it's a fairly long process to get him evicted out from that. And so to me, I want that to be a very penalizing amount in there for holdover. I think in the base forms, I have it at 500. I don't know if that's even right anymore, because if you had to get 2 hotel rooms and board your dogs, you're at 500 really close, and store things, you're at 500 a night really easily. So maybe it needs to be 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,500. So just make sure that you've got an appropriate holdover in there, and then that you're telling both parties, like, that doesn't just mean like it just extends and you get that money. It's really that, hey, you need to get out, and everybody needs to kind of come to that agreement together. Okay, so that's holdover. Let's go down to page 9. Which actually has moved to page 10 in the new contract. So it just has where not to put the commission amount. Some people think that whatever the amount that you put in page 10, where it says listing broker to pay buyer's agent so much % of list price, and that is really what controls the commission. Really, that is just for informational purposes only. What controls is what's in MLS under that BAC. So you can put something different in there, but really what will come down to is what was in the BAC on MLS. All right. If the BAC is less than what is offered in the buyer rep agreement, you've got some different choices of what you can work with on your client on that. And so in this situation, what I'm talking about is, hey, the buyer rep that we signed, right, you know, when we did our buyer presentation, everybody was all good. We signed a 3% buyer rep. Now I'm showing them a property and it's only offering a 2.5% BAC instead of a 3% BAC. And so it creates really a pretty big issue between you and the buyer. It's really all created by the listing agent and the seller not putting on there what is kind of what more market rate. And so you've got to decide, how do you go forward with that? Is that something that you are willing to modify your buyer rep agreement and only take 2.5%? Or is it something that you're going to ask your buyer to pay that additional 0.5%? Or is it something that the buyer wants to ask the seller to pay that additional 0.5%? And they could do that using paragraph 12A1B to cover that additional 0.5, so that way then you're made whole and they're not having to pay you for that. So whichever direction you go is totally fine. It's just a matter of how do you address it. And it is something though that you do need to address with your client really before they're making the offer, so that you make sure that there's no like surprises for them of, oh, they didn't know that they were going to owe you that extra money for that 25% or 1% or something different. Any questions on that or issues? Okay. All right. Let's talk about withdrawing offers. You get this question a lot of, hey, my client made an offer, then they changed their mind. We haven't gotten an acceptance yet. What do I do? Do I need to send over a termination? You do not need to send over a termination. You just need to send over, really, I send it via email, send the same email that you sent the offer, send another email and says, client wishes to withdraw the offer. That's all you have to do. It's no big deal. And then that's done and over, done with. You don't have to do anything else from there. Cool. Okay. Backup offers. So backup offers are a really strong option, especially in this market. So if you make an offer and you rise to hopefully number 2 position in the multiple offer situation, but you, for whatever reason, didn't get number 1 position, then you may want to talk with your client about, do they want to make an offer it to be in backup status? If they are in backup status, then they would need to make a whole new offer, because they'll need to add the backup addendum. And then with that, the way that it's written out, unless they add any special language to special provisions, any attorney written language to special provisions, then the earnest money and the option fee would be due when that offer gets accepted. So when the backup offer gets accepted. So if you made your initial offer with like a $1,500 option fee, you may want to really bring that down to more like a $100 option fee or a $10 option fee or something much lower, because that money would be due when you go under contract. Now, the earnest money is really refundable at any point during, from when that offer gets accepted all the way through when you get notice that you went into first position, and then for that option period after that, because your option period doesn't actually start until that first contract terminates and y'all are given notice of that. That becomes your day 0, your effective date, and then you count your dates from there. Does anybody have any questions about backup offers or how that works?
Amy, if they do a backup offer, can we still look at other properties, or do we have to wait until?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So yeah, I think what a lot of people do in this situation is that they go ahead and get in backup position, but then they are still going out and looking at other properties and making other offers on properties. And then if that one gets accepted and they like it better, then withdrawing or terminating that, that would be terminating that backup contract that they got in place the other way.
Oh, okay, cool.
The other thing that I see happen quite a bit is that listing agents don't fully understand backup offers. And so they get real nervous when you submit a backup offer to them because they don't really understand why the option fee and the earnest money is deliverable right when it goes under a contract. And they don't really know how to present it to their seller. And so sometimes they will say, you know, hey man, I really appreciate the offer. I've talked to the seller about it. We just want to hold it and we'll let you know if something happens during this option period. That is okay. I mean, until they sign it, it's not a contract, it's just an offer. But if they wanted to hold it and your client was okay with it, you know, that's potentially better than a rejection of it. But it doesn't protect you where y'all automatically go into first position if something happens with that second offer. Or sorry, with that first contract. If the first contract fails and you have been accepted as an executed backup contract, then as soon as something fails with that, then you pop into first position. And so that's the strength of it. This whole like holding it for unofficial. Sometimes you may need to talk the other agent through it, talk about why your buyer really wants to do that. And they're totally fine with paying the earnest money and the option fee, whatever it is, to try to get them to take you all the way through to that position, especially if it's something that it was in a lot of multiple offers before. You don't want any reason for it to go back into a multiple offer situation again. You really want to just be the one to get it that second time. And there are a lot of properties that I mean, y'all are seeing it, right? How many houses do we see as new listings every day on MLS versus how many do we see as back on the market every day, right? So right now I'm trending where, I mean, I'm seeing about a third of properties come back on the market. That's a whole lot of properties that if they had backup offers, they would have just gone to that directly. Okay. So that can be a really good option for y'all. Okay. And so there's the addendum for backup contract. All right. Effective date. Hold on just a second. Let me pause for a second. Okay. All right. Effective date. So the date on page, I have it on page 8, but it's actually on page 9 now, is your day 0. So hopefully y'all are pretty comfortable counting your dates, but the way that that would look like is, let's say that you did a 5-day option and the effective date is today. So if the effective date is today, the 23rd, then your day 1 would be the 24th, 25th, 26th, 27th, 28th. And so your option would end at 5 p.m. on the 28th. Okay. Everybody good on that? Anybody have trouble? Okay. But don't feel bad counting on your fingers. That's what I do all the time. Or on an actual calendar or something like that. Okay, offer acceptance. So if the agent sent seller signatures with changes needed from the buyer, then you just got to know that the seller could withdraw the offer at any time before all parties sign. So that's why I prefer for, if I'm the listing agent, for the seller to be the one to sign last, but a lot of agents don't do it that way. And so if they need to make a change, they'll make a change on your offer, send it back over to you. And at that point, it's really a counter offer. And then your buyer needs to sign it and send it back to make it effective. And then that would be the effective date when all parties agree. Okay, we had this happen yesterday, actually. We had an offer that we were told it was accepted, except for one change. The seller, we were representing the buyer. The seller was changing that the buyer needed to buy a new survey. Well, the buyer didn't sign all day long. They didn't sign that initial on there. Well, so comes to 7 o'clock and we get an email, hey, your buyer didn't sign. We're moving on to the next offer. Okay, so that can happen. And so you want to make sure, if you're representing the buyer, that they understand they need to be timely when they're responding to those requests. And it may be an hour, it may be 7 hours. I don't know how long that seller is going to give you, but it's not just an unlimited time to think about this, because that seller can withdraw that counter offer at any point. Okay. And then just make sure that the effective date is correctly completed on that date of the contract, and then send it over to SkySlope. So hopefully by the time you get to this point, you had already had the buyer rep already in SkySlope. And so you just need to change the address and then add this one to the checklist. Cool. Okay. All right, next steps email. So this is an example of what we send out on a next steps email. And so it's saying, hey, congratulations, buyer, you got the property under contract. Here is a fully executed copy of your contract. And then here's what I need you to do. First, I need you to deposit earnest maintenance option. This was an old one. Obviously, it had checks going to title and to seller. Now we're going to deliver all of that to title. And so we're going to get instructions from the title company and then let the buyer know how to get that done. Then we need to schedule the inspection. And then this goes through, you know, hey, you have this many days, and we have to get it fully negotiated by then. Here are some inspectors that you could call, or you can call anybody in the Yellow Pages type deal, Yellow Pages, the Googles, you know, whatever you think, to get the inspection scheduled. And then I copy the lender on there and say, hey, you need to go ahead and get your rate locked with your lender. Any questions on that? Okay. And then check. So, and it's changed a little bit, but what happens if you don't deliver the earnest money versus the option fee? Does anybody know what happens if you don't deliver the option fee?
You'd have an option?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You don't have an option. And so that has been the way that it has been forever. Now with the way that we're delivering both the option and the earnest money to the title company, the new contract actually says that if you deliver only part of the money, so like, let's say that you had $1,000 of earnest money and $100 of option, and you only gave 1,000, they would apply the 1,000 first to the $100 option and then 900 to the earnest. And so it would mean that you're short on the earnest versus, oh, I failed to deliver the option fee, and so I don't have an option. So we'll probably have a lot less of that where the option didn't make or whatever going forward. But it's just, time will tell a little bit on how this will work with the title companies actually accepting it, because all the title companies can do different ways of accepting and different ways of distributing the money. They are really the ones that are going to be the arbiters of that. And so we'll just have to see as that gets tested over these next few months.
Yeah, and to jump in on that, coming from the title side for the last several years, I'll promise you it's going to take some of these title officers a little while to understand exactly what that all means and what they're going to learn it. They're kind of putting those things in place over the last couple of months when their attorneys have told them, hey, we're going to start accepting this. And I tell you, I was there when it first came out and it was like, oh my gosh, all the amount of stuff now we have to deal with on the title side, right? Now we've got to cut additional checks. Now we have to do this. So your title company is going to go through a lot of growing pains with this. And so if you get to the point where maybe you're not working with your preferred title company, maybe it's a different title company and they have, for whatever reason, interpreted this differently than it really reads, and it didn't take the buyer's money and applied direct to option. They're like, well, they just didn't give the option, but they gave all the earnest money. Here you go. They're going to be wrong in that instance. And so if y'all have issues with that, it jumps up, and it will, I promise. And so when those things pop up, y'all let us know. Let me and Amy know pretty quickly so we can help educate a little bit on there if those title companies need that.
Yep. So it may take a little education. Good point. So now we have a consistent timeline of when the option fee and earnest money are due. So that is really nice that we aren't like on two different timelines for it, but just know that the buyer really has to get it in within those 3 days in order to be compliant, or the seller can terminate the contract for non-payment of earnest money. So we want to really make sure that they understand that risk of that. And then, like I said, the option fees the option periods are going to end at 5 p.m. And a long time ago, we used to have that where it ended at midnight, and we said, oh, that'll be terrible. That's terrible. Let's move it to 5. That'll be so much better. Well, now it's a scramble every time, we get close to 5 o'clock, but at least we do have daylight when that's happening, and we can kind of talk with the client about what is the best course of action for them as that option period is coming to an end. All right, so we went over that. All right, inspection and repairs. So what we really want to talk about mostly in this nuts and bolts is talking about the inspection, really reminding the inspection, the buyer about best practices, and you kind of knowing some best practices on how to handle an inspection. First off, I always start buyers with really helping them understand you are paying these people to find everything wrong with that house, right? Everything wrong. So you're going in and saying, here is my money. I want you to go through this house with a fine tooth comb and find everything wrong. It's shocking how many buyers then are like, what? I can't believe they found all these things wrong with my house. Well, yeah, that's what you paid them to do, was to find these things wrong. So, I think having that mindset from the beginning of that's what you paid them to do. And then also having the mindset of like, I have them think about like, I want you to think about grandma's house. I want you to think about your house. I want you to think about these homes that you love. And what would happen if this same inspector came through today and looked at that house? What would he find? Would he find it all to be perfect? No, like it's not, there is no expectation that this is going to be a perfect appraisal inspection, because there is no such thing. And so I just want them to be kind of cognizant of that from the very beginning, of that this is what we're doing here, is we're trying to figure out, is there anything so concerning that you want to terminate this contract? And if so, you have until this timeline to do it. Now, they could, of course, go back and ask for different repairs, but y'all probably know in this market how often that's happening, right? Right now, if we're going in and there were 10 offers that were ready to buy that house, we came out on top. Great news for us, but that doesn't mean that we can come in and ask for a new HVAC system, or even a new doorbell. Maybe like we just may not be successful on asking for anything. And so I also want to set them up with that expectation from the very beginning too, of that, hey, I don't want you to think like this is like, oh yay, we beat out these 10 people and then we can beat up the seller during this inspection and option process and we're going to come out winners of this. It's just not the reality of what's happening. What is more likely is that the seller will say, no, thank you, and then see if you will terminate, because if that buyer will terminate, then they can go to buyer number 2. So it's just trying to figure out, kind of what the overall goal is. If the overall goal is to close, then we're really just doing this inspection to do a double check to make sure there wasn't anything terminal that they didn't know about before. Okay, so knowing that, usually inspections are going to last around 3 hours. I do still like to be there in the last 30 minutes with the buyer. I will tell you that is changing for me a little bit. That I don't know that it's essential that we're there, because the reports are really so thorough. We are seeing all the pictures and those kind of things on the reports. And then because there is really very little negotiation on the backside, we don't need to know, potentially like the minutia of what repairs are needed. But it is a nice warm and fuzzy time-ish for the buyer to get to see the house one more time, and for you to get to be there with them. And where I say warm and fuzzy-ish is, y'all know it's a stressful time for the buyer. And so when you're not there and they're there with this big bad inspector that just told them all these things that are wrong with this precious house that they just wanted to buy, that's when it starts to get like just where they're kind of anxious and hyperventilating a little bit. And so if you can be there, it is more just a hand holding time of getting them calmed down and that kind of thing, versus really adding too much to it of anything of consequence to the inspection time. I'll tell you too, the other thing that I see happen a lot of times in that 30 minutes of the inspection is that we have a tendency, and y'all, I do it too, to want to downplay things that the inspector found because in our mind, they aren't that big a deal. Okay. And so I cannot tell you how many times I have been in an inspection and caught myself saying like, oh yeah, fogged windows, that's not that big a deal. Oh yeah, that older electric panel, I have that in my house too. That's not that big a deal, right? And even though that may not be a big deal to me, and I likely can't get it paid for by the seller, if their house burns down tomorrow because of that old electric panel, it is a big deal. It's a big deal to them. It's going to be a big deal to me if I said, oh, hey, that wasn't a big deal. Okay. So I've got to make sure that I'm not setting up us for an E&O claim by me saying things during the inspection. And so I really just smile and nod a lot during the inspection. I don't say much. I have to physically stop myself from saying much. And then just ask them at the end of the time, like, was there anything that you feel like would keep you from going through with this transaction? Okay, and leave it at that. So I don't know if anybody else has any hints on that. It's hard to do, but it really is. Like, I don't want you to overthink your participation in the inspection. Okay.
Yeah, so I even struggle with that quite often because of the investment side of what I do in real estate. I've been inside walls and under houses and on top of houses for quite some time. And so whenever I see some of those things come up and I'm like, oh yeah, you do kind of have to kind of catch yourself a little bit and kind of step back and not say something that, could be a potential issue down the road. Right. And the main thing on there is just, everybody has their own opinions about everything, and you don't want to project your own feelings about a issue or a non-issue, or that's not a big deal, or it is a big deal, or what classifies something as a big rock item that we've been saying for years and years about these things. So it is difficult to do. It is best in there. We know that y'all care about your clients and you want to help them the best you can and give your 2 cents in some of those things. Just try to be careful about giving your opinion when it's, the opinion is the person that's actually walking around for 3-4 hours before you actually get there and doing the inspection. So
Right.
try to lean on them for doing that. It's difficult to do, but practice makes perfect. So just try to get in there. Some of those inspections, show up those last few minutes, or if you have a real problem with that, don't show up the last few minutes.
I mean, really, I would rather you do that. I would rather you not show up than show up and say, oh yeah, no, we can get all this fixed, or oh yeah, it's not that big a deal, or oh, your home warranty is probably going to cover all that. Like, any language like that, if you can't stop yourself from saying, just don't come to the inspection.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes it's best just eliminate the possibility of you sticking your foot in your mouth or saying something you probably shouldn't be saying, and not being there. Now, obviously, if you can be there and you can kind of hold back from, like I said, it's that projection of your own feelings. Just try to hold those back. So.
And you don't have to be there. It's not like the inspector can't get in without you. It's not like the client can't get in. I mean, it really is. This is not a part that you have to be there. It's more of just an optional deal. Okay, so you're going to get a 30 to 80 page report with all this information. I do like to go through the report and look at things that are safety, soundness, and security issues. So, if I see that there's gas leaking into their house, I do want to make sure they saw that, that, hey, the top of the water heater is off and it's putting fumes in your house or something like that. Those are really the bigger things that I'm looking for to make sure that they're okay. And or have a plan for, do we want to ask the seller to do it, or do y'all want to do it after closing? Because I want to make sure that you don't put your babies in a house that's going to blow up or something like that. So not that it is, but just that's my biggest thing on there. So I normally will send an email to the buyer with a breakdown of items to ask the seller to repair, honeydew items, and then things that are going to be, that are the way that they are. They're things that really can't be fixed about the house. Now, I will tell you, that was kind of the old market where we actually had a shot at some of those. I am not doing that detailed anymore. I really am just scheduling a call with them, going over everything and seeing, is there anything that they want to ask for, but really setting up that expectation that I do not know if the seller will do anything for them. So I used to spend a couple of hours on this process. That has really come down to where it's really more of a 30-minute Zoom call with them, just to go over everything to make sure that everything's full from their perspective. HVAC servicing, I do love to get that if possible, because if they are getting a home warranty, then the home warranty is going to want to see that the HVAC worked when they did the inspection. And most of the time, the inspector is going to mark it as deficient from the very beginning. Again, I don't know how reasonable it is to actually get it approved right now, but you could ask for that. And then buyer needs to really respond with what they are comfortable asking for. And then if they want to ask for something, then we would write up the amendment. We would get it signed by the buyer, send the email to the listing agent with a repair request. And then if the buyer wants to send them the inspection report too, they can. And the reason why I say if is because that truly is the work product of the buyer. It's not something that we paid for. The buyer paid potentially, $500-600 for that inspection report. And so they may want to give that to the seller, or they may want to hold it for themselves. really that's up to them. And so that's why we would ask them if they wanted to do that or not. I always would recommend anytime you're talking about amending the contract to actually write up specifically what you want and send it over versus just having a conversation with the listing agent about it, because it's difficult if you're having a conversation to really enumerate what it is. And so by having it all in writing, then they really have to present it to the seller. The seller then gets your response back and you've got a more official response. Cool. So this is kind of the example of what I was doing as far as things we'd like the seller to work with us on and honey-do items for after closing. This is another example of that. It was working really well. It's just now we're in this crazy market where it's hard to get anything approved by it. But I am seeing some. I'm just not seeing as many things as this, right? It's more limited as far as what we're seeing on there. And I am seeing more amount in lieu of repairs. So let's say that we do the inspection report and the buyer is like, wow, that was a lot. It was way more than I anticipated. Do you think that the seller would give like $1,000 towards repairs? So in that situation, rather than writing an amendment that says, hey, we need $1,000 in lieu of repairs, instead, we're going to use paragraph 12A1B, which is that amount where the seller is paying closing costs on behalf of the buyer. And we would put $1,000 in there. And so that way, then when the buyer's lender sees that amendment come through, they don't see that the house was deficient in some way, that the buyer is just getting money for those repairs. Instead, they see, oh, the seller just offered to pay some closing costs for the buyer. That's great. We're going to totally go through and not raise any red flags with that. It's just the way that it's been done in Texas for a long time. So that's how we use it. If somehow, which I can't imagine how, you had gotten the seller to pay for some closing costs for the buyer in the initial offer, make sure that you add that to that second amendment or that amendment so that you don't wipe that out, because it says in the amendment that that amount in 12A1B replaces what was in the original contract. Okay, so if you got, let's say 5,000 originally, you wanted to add 1,000, don't just do it as 1,000 on the amendment, do it as 6,000. Okay. And then lender required repairs. Sometimes buyers will wait to see if there are lender required repairs because they think this like white knight lender is going to come through and say, oh, I want you, Mr. Seller, to do this, this, and this, or else I'm not going to let my buyer buy this house. Likely it's not going to happen. It could happen on FHA or VA, maybe, but I don't ever want to set up a buyer to think that that is actually like the reality of it. The reality of it is that most of the appraisers are just going through, they're checking their boxes and they're pushing it through. They're not really catching all the things that would be potentially on a required repair list. What they are mainly catching are broken windows. So especially if it's a broken window, like right kind of in their face, not necessarily like a little crack in the upstairs window, but broken windows, peeling paint or wood rot in a significant way, not just a little bit, but a lot. And then conducive conditions for wood destroying insects is a big thing on VA. And that's going to be things like the bushes are too close to the house. Maybe there's a wood pile too close to the house. It's not stuff that usually is that hard to get fixed. It's not that expensive to get fixed. And so it's something that we can really usually overcome and it's not that big a deal. Has anybody had any issues with lender required repairs? Okay. Home warranties. Which also are called residential service contracts. These are, in my opinion, a great thing to have on a contract for a buyer or seller because it's a great risk reduction tool. So the reason why I still love these is that it gives the buyer something, right? So that if they move in and on day one, the HVAC breaks, then they can call the home warranty company, and for $75, the home warranty company will come out and fix whatever to get the cooler going. Now, it's not a great situation a lot of times because it'll take 4 or 5 or 10 or 3 hours. I mean, it's potentially they're going to have to wait a while to get that out because they're not just calling their vendor. The home warranty company is calling the vendor and then sending it out, but they will get it done. And it will be for a lot cheaper than if they just called a vendor on their own after. So that's good for buyers. It's also good for sellers, because if that happens on the first day that that buyer is in the house, then the seller is not getting a call from an attorney saying, hey, you son of a bitch, you sold them this house that didn't have a working HVAC. You knew about it. You should have disclosed it. Now you're going to have to pay whatever for it. It just is a nice risk reduction tool on both sides for $400. So I still like it. I still encourage parties to offer it, but it's not something that we're seeing a lot, just because of the competitiveness of the market. Any questions on any of that? Oops. Okay. All right, we talked about that. Okay, end of option. So occasionally we will get to 5 o'clock on the day the option is ending, and we will not have heard anything from the listing agent, even when you ask them for an amendment for repairs, and you have called them, texted them, emailed them again, sent them bombs, sent them, carrier pigeon, anything, and they are not responding. Their non-response is a response. Okay. And so if you are not getting any word back from the listing agent, your buyer needs to understand that is a no, and they need to decide, are they willing to go forward with that house as is, or do they want to terminate? Because their termination option ends at 5 p.m. And so they need to get over the termination of contract prior to 5 p.m. if it is a no and they're not willing to go forward with it. Totally fine, whatever they decide, but they do need to go ahead and get that termination out so that they can, so that it goes of record and that they've got it time date stamped. And when I send a termination option, you're going to send it to first the note, whatever email is in the notices on paragraph 23 of the actual contract, the listing agent, the title company. I would send it to the lender. I'd send it to, their great aunt Bob, anybody that you can think of that was on that file at any point, send it to them so that it's very clear that the termination was sent prior to 5 o'clock. Okay. If the buyer wants to terminate, if they don't want to terminate, if they were just trying to get $1,000, then they shouldn't do that. They should just let 5 o'clock come and go. They didn't get it, whatever, go on down the road. If they want to extend the option, which a lot of people want to extend the option, they think, oh, I just need a little bit more time, or maybe the seller needs some time to get the roof evaluated, or they need this, or whatever the situation is. Then you both need to agree, have that option extension signed prior to 5 o'clock, making sure that that option does continue. And then also whatever money is contemplated in that option extension, it actually needs to be delivered to the seller, or I guess now title company. So I will tell you, I think it's a little unclear from the amendment how to deliver that option fee, but you would just need to decide whichever you want to do. But you do have to pay the dollar, even if it's just $1, you have to pay it in order to create the option. They might have any questions on that. So a lot of times for me, we just did this twice, but it was on the old form. And so I did just like how this is, $1 in an envelope, and I dropped it in the mail. It would have been better for me to go and drop it at their office, but it is also just $1. So it just feels like slightly ridiculous to do it. And there are other outs in the contract if for some reason the seller challenged us on it, but really that would likely get you covered. Okay. All right. All right. Confirmation of completion of repairs. If there were actual repairs to be done, then you deserve receipts on those. And so make sure to ask the listing agent for those so that way they know that they're done. And then the buyer can choose to re-inspect, or they can just accept the receipts for what they are and go on from there. I have this on vendor referrals. It's hard for me to give a lot of vendor referrals to clients because I never know exactly how they're going to do it. And are they going to do it as well as I would want them to do it? And is that going to leave potentially a bad taste in their mouth about somebody that I referred when I was just trying to do the right thing? Especially movers, cleaners, lawn people, things that are happening right at the end of that transaction. Sometimes it can be really tricky. And so just have to really vet out those people that you're referring out. Okay, now we're to closing and document review. My favorite topic, appraisal. All right, so my first line on here is appraisals are dumb. That's still my stance. I've had it for a long time. It is a paper number, and it's not really market driven, and it's not really what other consumers will pay for the property. It's backward looking, right? It's not looking at where the market is going. It's looking at what has already happened. And so it's taking the last 6 to 9 months of comps and then saying, okay, that's what our value is now, which I don't think is real. So that's all of that is big issues for me, as why I don't love appraisals in general. They are ordered by the lender. There's normally 2 sections of it: a field work appointment, where it's about 30 minutes and they take pictures and measure the house. And then a report will come out where they've done desktop analysis. And so then they've taken that field work and they combine it with the desktop analysis, and they send over this full appraisal report. And y'all have seen those. They're, again, 20 to 30 pages long, a lot of information in there. All that I really care about is on the very bottom of the second page, in little bitty letters, it'll say the opinion of value is blank, and we're looking for that to be whatever they're contracted for. And then for it to say next to that, as is, not with the box checked of needs repair. Okay, and most often it's checked as is. It's very rare that it's need repair, but occasionally it are subject to completion. And so occasionally it is that, but most of the time it is going to be as is. And so when I'm representing the buyer, I may get a full copy of the appraisal. It's fine. If I do, I really don't care if I don't. I'm just looking for the lender to confirm, did it meet value? That's really all I care about. Did it meet value? Are we okay on that side? Cool. Kind of cool. Let's see if I talk more about it. So what to do if the appraisal comes in low? So if the appraisal comes in low, I have first here, remember who your fiduciary duty is to. So we're talking about buyers here, right? And so if I am representing a buyer and we are under contract at 350 and the appraisal comes in at 325, then is it in my buyer's best interest to start immediately fighting for that appraisal to come in at 350? Well, maybe not, right? Because maybe the seller will lower that price to 325 now that he knows we have a bona fide third-party appraisal that says, hey, the house is not worth 350, it's only worth 325. Okay, so I want to talk with my buyer about what options do you want to do on here. Now, it may be that we go back to the seller and say, hey, we wanted to buy it at 350, but we can only buy it for 325. And they say, great, I'm going to buyer number 2, get the hell out of here. And then we say, well, hold on. Actually, no, we'll still pay 350. We'll just pay that difference in cash, or well, would you at least split it with me? Or, what if I change my down payment so that I have enough money to pay for it? I don't know. There are just a lot of different options on here. And it's not just a hard and fast, like, oh, it didn't meet appraisal, the contract failed, and I go away. So it's really talking with your buyer. What do they want? How far do they want to push this? Do you think that the appraisal was right? Or do you think that the appraiser was wrong? Because if you feel like the appraiser was wrong, then there potentially is a process to go through on a rebuttal to try to get it up. It's just a pretty massive process on that. For me to do a rebuttal, it normally takes me 4 to 6 hours of really going through and preparing a lot of information, then scheduling time to present that to the lender, then really talking, going back and forth with the client. Like, it's just a lot of process to go through. If I think the appraiser was right in the first place. If the appraiser is right, I can't do anything about it. And so I really just need the buyer to make some decisions on what they're going to do. Okay. Any questions on that or things y'all have had issues with? It's happening a lot. I'll tell you, it's not happening all the time, but this low appraisal situation is happening a lot. And I project it will happen even more over these next 5 years. So, I'm having a lot of conversations about it right now because it is just, the numbers are coming up so quickly that it is tough for us to really stay on top of it from this appraisal issue that makes it this circular situation. So, all right, HOA survey and title documents. Really, as far as your responsibility as the buyer's agent with that is really just to make sure that the buyer received them all and then facilitate getting questions answered if they have any. So you don't need to explain all these documents to them. In fact, you should not, because you're not an attorney. So really it's just making sure that they got them And then did they have any questions? If they did, then pointing them in the right direction, or, connecting them. So maybe they need to talk with their lender, maybe they need to talk with the title rep, maybe, whoever they need to talk with, so that way they can get all their questions answered. All right. CDA, the Commission Disbursement Authorization. So that should come from paperwork at frontrec.com, and it will go to the title company directly with the agent copied. The way that we do CDAs is just as soon as everything is entered into SkySlope and there aren't any other required fields, then we'll go ahead and prep and send a CDA over. So it may be fast. Like I do a lot of them before the option period is even over, just to make sure that there's no delay and that you're not holding up for CDAs. If for some reason you didn't get everything into SkySlope, then it may be delayed, right? So, I mean, that's part of the agreement of why we have to have everything into SkySlope within 2 days, so that way we can make sure that we're getting those CDAs out to make sure title's cutting y'all's checks correctly. Cool. All right, walkthrough. So buyer walkthrough is really important. It is really going to give the buyer that last time to walk through the house, make sure they understand what they're buying, because keep in mind, when you're doing walkthrough, a lot of times it's been at least 3 weeks since they've been through the house, and you may or may not have been with them when they came through the house that time with the inspector. And before that, they might have only come through in that 15-minute, 30-minute appointment before. So they have not spent a lot of time in this house. They are making the biggest investment of their life. They need to have one more time to walk through right before closing. This isn't like a time that I'm encouraging them to terminate or anything. That's not what I'm hoping that they do. But I just want to make sure that they see their asset that they are about to buy, and that they haven't forgotten or looked through with rose-colored glasses too much before they're going through that final walkthrough. So I normally like to do walkthrough right on the way to closing. It does burn me sometimes, but I will, if we're scheduling closing at 10, I'll schedule walkthrough at 9:15, and tell the buyer, like, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to go meet at the house at 9:15. We're going to walk through from 9:15 to 9:30. Then we're going to drive to title. You should have time to stop by Starbucks if you want to on the way. And then we'll get to title and get through closing. And so that way I've set up, right? This is not like hours that we're spending in the house together at walkthrough. We are just walking through to confirm that there hasn't been any additional damage, that everything is okay at the house. The water heater hasn't exploded. The windows aren't broken. There wasn't anything significant that happened. Okay. Where this also is a good time to double check is, did the people move out, right? If they did not have a lease back, did they move out? Most of the time they have. Sometimes they have only moved out partially. And so that's what you need to know before you go into closing, so that you can get it handled, any remaining repairs, and make sure that they're out. And then if it's clean or the yard is mowed, those kind of things. Because what happens, does anybody know if the house is not cleaned? Oh. So if you go to walk through and it just looks like crap in there. So that must mean y'all haven't had that happen to you, which I'm thrilled for y'all. So unfortunately, there is not a lot that we can do other than the buyer can stop closing. Okay. And so the reason why I do those walkthroughs right before we go to closing is because if we came through the night before or the day before or 2 days before, a lot of times we just assume that, oh, I'm sure the seller is going to come back through and clean, or they're going to come back through and get this rest of the stuff out, or they're going to come back through and whatever. And if I go through right before closing, I know like they're not coming back. This is how it is. And so are we going to close with this, or are we not? I can remember years ago, my sister closed on a house in Watauga, which should have been our first issue, but she bought this house in Watauga. And the guy, when he moved out, he didn't move out hardly any of his stuff. He just walked away, and there was so much crap in the house. Dumpsters full of crap in the house, and he didn't get it out. And so we had to make a choice. Did they still want to go forward with that transaction, or did they want to terminate because he was not going to come back? He wasn't going to come and get that stuff out. And so they went ahead and chose to go forward with it. But if I hadn't done the walkthrough, how would that be, right? If that hadn't been the walkthrough, they came through the last time during that inspection time. And now then I give them their key and I'm like, all right, have fun, go check out your new house. And they go in and see that. Holy crap, like it's a really bad day, right? So instead, this walkthrough really does help make sure that everybody's good and kind of gets it and goes on. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a warm, fuzzy time either, but it at least is a like, hey, this is what I got. This is what I am dealing with, the reality of it. And then we want to have this walkthrough and acceptance form signed just to clarify that what they're signing. I normally send this to them to be electronically signed during closing. And so then they do it kind of in that 5 minutes. So we're waiting for them to make copies. All right, closing disclosure. So the lender needs to get the closing disclosure signed by the buyer 3 days prior to closing. So hopefully y'all know that now. This has been a rule for a few years. And so pretty much everybody's used to it now. We thought that this would be just so awesome for everybody and that everything would be just wrapped up with a bow 3 days prior to closing. And then it would just sit on the closer's desk waiting for us to come in. And we would be just like, oh, happy, skipping along to closing. And instead what has happened is that the buyer gets this like rushed 6, 7 o'clock at night CD, still documents aren't to title. It's still kind of a mess, but it does actually make it where then usually within that 3 days, they have figured it out and gotten everything together so that we can show up for closing and know that there is actually going to be a closing. So that's normally a good thing. You can schedule the closing time for the buyer. That way, then you know it's a good time for you too. Usually it's going to take about an hour and then let everybody know. I really do try to get both my buyers and sellers to close before lunch so that way then it gives that title company time during the day to get it funded. And so normally, you know, full close at 9, 10, or 11, then we're funded, you know, 2, 3 o'clock at least. And we're not waiting for that like 6, 7 o'clock. Oh, wait, did it go to the next day? Do we have stuff in a moving van? Do we need to negotiate a 1-day lease back? Like, you can get a little crazy with that. So if you just schedule closings in the morning, normally you can avoid that. You will get a copy of the closing disclosure, and I would just suggest to review it for consistency with the contract details. You don't have to be the expert on all things closing disclosure. Really, you just need to make sure, did they get the option fee on there? Did they get the earnest money on there? Did they have that amendment that said that the seller was going to pay $5,000 of closing costs? Did they get that on there? Those kind of things. And then beyond that, it's really okay. You're just double checking those things and then asking the buyer, did they see anything that looked wrong to them? And then letting the title company know if there is. Make sure the buyer knows how much to bring to closing and if they're going to have it in a wire or a cashier's check. And then I do try to attend closing. That is really where you get some warm fuzzy on it. So you've been through the walkthrough, hopefully you're at the closing table and they really are excited to be buying that house. And so this is a really fun time. They are, you know, stressed, but not too much. It's, there's really no responsibility for you at closing. You're really just there to handhold and just to kind of have some light conversation while they're signing. They really are doing everything on their own at that point. It is a great time for closing gifts if you want to do that. And then it's also a great time to ask for feedback and reviews. So if you don't have that as part of your process, that can be a really great thing to be able to promote to get other buyers and sellers from that too. And then after closing, normally then you'll get a call from the title company a few hours later that says, hey, it's funded. And so then that's when you get to call everybody and congratulate them and say, oh my gosh, you got it, congrats. And then you get keys to the buyer. Now, I'll say it in that order, right? Because that's the official way. And if you ever ask me, even though this is being recorded, that, hey, does the buyer get keys until after it funds? Yes, the buyer only gets keys after it funds. However, sometimes it is more convenient to either leave keys at title for the buyer to swing back by and pick up, or if it is a buyer that you have a really strong relationship with and you know they're not going to go in and knock down walls or even move in at all to the house, then sometimes, occasionally, we will give them the keys in advance of funding and just tell them not to access the house until funding happens. So it's not best practice. Best practice is to wait, then maybe do this like big like balloons and whatever at the house with them, however you want to do it. But that's just reality of how keys get over to it. But it is your responsibility as the buyer's agent to make sure that they do have keys to the property. Cool. Okay. Terminating a contract. So let's say this isn't withdrawing an offer. We're talking about fully terminating a contract. So you're under contract, everybody agreed, and then for whatever reason, your buyer wants to terminate. Make sure to use the notice of buyer's termination of contract and the release of earnest money. The release of earnest money is what actually terminates the contract between both of the parties. The notice of termination of contract only terminates it unilaterally, so only the buyer is terminating it with the seller. So you want to have both of those together, and then like the other one, we just want to send it to everybody we can to make sure everybody knows that we're terminating. And then once the contract is terminated, the contract cannot be revived. Sometimes we see that where maybe a seller was kind of flirting with that 5 o'clock deadline on the option, and so they weren't responding or something. And so you send over a termination, let's say at 4:45, and they say, oh my gosh, I mean, I had 15 minutes. I was gonna get you that signed amendment back. Well, once you've terminated it, there's not a way to just withdraw it and say, okay, well, let's just pretend like I didn't send it. That was official. So it's okay. We can get back under another contract unless there was already a backup offer, or sorry, backup contract in place. If there was a backup contract in place, then that backup contract just immediately went into first position. Okay, so it is a big deal to terminate a contract. It's not just something that is taken lightly, but if that's what the buyer wants to do, we need to make sure that we go ahead and do that correctly. Cool. All right, so it's both of those forms. And then we're sold. So we made it all the way through. Buyers, do y'all have any questions or anything? All right, like lots of talking today, but you know, I still love y'all. All right, well, if you think of anything, let me know, but otherwise we'll stop there and just go get some more buyers. I know it is tough right now for buyers, but it can happen. I will tell you, stay tuned for kind of a pop-up offer presentation that I'm gonna do sometime either later today or tomorrow, just talking about how to make aggressive offers in this market. It's crazy. So we're just trying to help everybody as much as they can make as good of offers as possible. So just stay tuned for that. We'll talk soon though.
Thanks.
Good to see y'all.
Thank you, Amy. Bye-bye.
Bye.